The next one is the pollination by water. So here the pollen grains drift in water and they come in contact with the stigma of the female flower. All the aquatic plants are not pollinated by water, or they do not get pollinated in water. Example, lotus are pollinated by insects. Though they are present in the water, they get the help from the insects for pollination. The pollen here is very light since they have to float in the surface of the water to reach the stigma. They do not need or they do not produce nectar to attract the insects. The pollens are produced large in quantities as the fertilization takes place only by chance. The male and female flowers are usually separate, that is, the plants are unisexual. Example, Vallisneria hydrilla. Here is an example of Vallisneria. The male flower produces the pollen grains which are light enough, get floated on the water and reaches the stigma of the flower for fertilization. The next one is the insect pollination. It's a very common among the plants. Insects like bees, flies, wasp, moth, beetle help in the pollination. Certain conditions for the pollination is the flowers should be brightly colored and should be produced some scent and fragrance to attract the insects. They produce nectar as a food for the insects. These insects visit the flower and collect the nectar. When they visit the flower, the pollen grains get stuck onto their body. When they visit another flower, the pollen grains get transferred to the stigma of that flower. So, the stigma and pollen grains are sticky. So here you can see the bees, when they visit the flower, accidentally the pollen grains get stuck onto their body. Birds, flies, wasps and many more also help in the pollination. So what is a nectar? Nectar is a sweet, fluid or sap-like substance either present in the petals or in the pollen or in the stigma of the flower to attract the insects. When the insects do come for their food, accidentally carry the pollen and help in pollination. So what happens in the fertilization? When the pollen are carried from another plant to the stigma of the flower, so when the pollen lands on the stigma, they develop a pollen tube and enters to the micropyle, that is opening of the ovary. Once they reach, let's see. So you can see the pollen grain landing on the stigma. The generative nucleus divide into two male gametes, move towards the micropyle, the opening of the ovary. One male gamete fuses with the egg cell and forms a zygote, and another male gamete fuses with the polar nucleus and forms the endosperm. This egg cell later develops into the ovule and the endosperm later develops into the ovary or the fruit. The ovary develops into a fruit and the ovule develops into a seed. So that's all for today's video. In today's video, catch you with other interesting video on fruit.